Hello, this is the Lord's Legion and welcome to the best villains ever, the show in which I talk about a specific villain and talk about their backstories, abilities, greatest feats, and why I love them so much. And to celebrate the release of the Venom movie, I thought, you know what, why not just focus on the big bad himself, Venom? Especially since it's been a long time since I last talked about a Spider-Man villain, and I personally think now is as good a time as ever to do one for Venom. And in this particular video, I'm only going to be focusing on the Eddie Brock incarnation, so don't expect me to mention any other hosts outside of just Eddie Brock. But without further ado, let's begin with his backstory. Now, Eddie Brock was raised as a Roman Catholic in suburban San Francisco, and he was always somewhat shunned by his own father, mainly because he blamed Eddie for his wife's death during childbirth. And even despite the fact that Eddie Brock was a bright kid in school, he still didn't get the respect from his father. And if anything, his resentment towards his own son grew ever more, even after Eddie Brock got knocked over by a car as a child, and made a full recovery at a cost of them becoming bankrupt. Years later, Eddie Brock gained a lot of qualifications in order to become a professional journalist, as well as marrying Anne Weyand. And even despite him doing very well for himself and even getting a job at the Daily Globe, he still didn't get the respect from his father. But this is just the beginning of Eddie Brock's downfall. Because as Eddie was trying to get the next big scoop, he believed he may have caught something on the infamous Sin Eater. And he even reported on this, despite the fact that he got the wrong information, and hours later Spider-Man was the one who caught the real Sin Eater, while everyone else shunned Eddie Brock and ultimately got fired from his job. And instead, Eddie was forced into doing some tabloids, mainly because everyone thought that he was a fraud, when in reality he was just given wrong information. But not only that, his own wife Anne Weyand filed a divorce on Eddie, his father disowned him completely, and on top of all of that, Eddie discovered that he had cancer and only had a few months to live. Pretty much blaming Spider-Man for everything wrong that's happened to his life. Believing that Eddie Brock has nothing left to live, he decided to visit the church and beg for forgiveness, as he was pretty much on the verge of committing suicide. But just before Eddie was going to leave, the alien symbiote that was once bonded with Spider-Man ultimately bonded with Eddie Brock, and since both of them were so fueled on their hatred towards Spider-Man, they ultimately became one in the same, thus becoming Venom and wanting revenge on Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Now, looking back on his origin story, Eddie Brock easily has one of the most depressing origins I have ever witnessed for a villain. Because he was never really a bad guy at all, and if anything, he was only really a victim of circumstance. He never intended on being dishonest or anything, he was only given wrong information, and as a result he was just shunned by everyone. And since pretty much everyone disowned him, Eddie thought that he was alone up until he met the symbiote. And in a way, him becoming the lethal protector gives him a second chance in life. Now, there's no denying that Venom has a ton of powers and abilities at his disposal. For starters, Venom possesses superhuman strength, durability, stamina, speed, agility, and reflexes. Not to mention that he does have a very rapid healing factor to boot. And since the symbiote adapted some of Spider-Man's abilities, Venom can do pretty much anything that Spider-Man is capable of, such as weapon generation, wall crawling, spider sense. And speaking of spider sense, Venom, like all other symbiotes, are immune to Spider-Man's spider sense. But not only that, Venom also has several other powers of his own, such as some form of invisibility, as well as shapeshifting. He can turn his limbs into other weaponry. He can detect other symbiotes and even Spider-Man, not to mention he also has night vision, venomous fangs, and even has some resistance to telepathy. Now, over the years, Venom has achieved plenty of impressive feats. And I know the feats can vary depending on different hosts, but like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm only going to be focusing on Eddie Brock as Venom. For starters, Venom is capable of impaling Wolverine onto a tree branch by punching him straight to it. Plus, Venom has also demonstrated in that he can stun the likes of Juggernaut with his own punches, as well as demolishing a burning building, which in itself is impressive given that fire is a major weakness for a symbiote. Plus, he can easily backhand Spider-Man completely out of sight, and knocking him back for a large distance. And he can even trade some blows from the likes of Carnage, who is considered to be more powerful than Venom himself, as well as obliterating an android's head to pieces with only one punch. Plus, Venom is strong enough to even hold his own against his cloned counterpart. Not to mention he can also stun Nova with a single punch. and he can even pull Ghost Rider's chains off of his neck, as well as ripping through Ben Reilly's impact weapon, as well as stopping the military vehicle and tearing it apart piece by piece. He can also effortlessly snap a demon's neck, as well as tossing a burning car towards Spider-Man in a pretty high speed. Plus Venom can also swing a dinosaur by its tail through the walls of a sewer, and knocking it out effortlessly. But not only that, Venom is fast enough to catch a pair of bullets before they could even hit him, as well as withstanding a punch straight to the jaw from the Hulk of all people. Plus he can also survive getting thrown across the city by Carnage, as well as tanking punches and kicks from the Juggernaut, and can even survive an explosion of a power plant and escape with relative ease, as well as forming his own pair of wings and glide through the air. And the most brutal of them all, his symbiote is capable of filling a man up whole and making him almost explode, which is a pretty brutal way to die. Now it comes as a shock to absolutely no one that Venom has a ton of other incarnations through other mediums, such as his ultimate incarnation, in that his origin, instead of being an alien, the symbiote was just a suit that was created by Richard Parker and Eddie Brock Sr., in that the suit was designed to cure cancer. Personally, I've never been too big on the Ultimate, so naturally, I wasn't particularly too fond of this incarnation of Venom. He also appeared in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, which is probably what introduced most people, including myself, to the character. And honestly, I thought they did this villain justice, at least as far as what they could do with a Saturday morning cartoon. Although his face always particularly bothered me for some reason. I'm not sure if it was just the fact that he almost has pupils, or the fact that he has lips, or maybe it's just a combination of both. And he was also more or less the main villain for the first season of The Spectacular Spider-Man, which at first I wasn't too fond of this incarnation, but the more I watched the series and the more I enjoyed it, the more I ultimately liked this version of Venom, because he did feel like a legitimate threat to both Spider-Man and Peter Parker, both physically and psychologically. Not to mention that he did make his first live-action appearance in Spider-Man 3, who was portrayed by Topher Grace, and the less we talk about this version of Venom, the better, because I really hate Spider-Man 3 and what they did to Venom. And then lastly, we have the most recent version of Venom, of course, existing in Sony's Spider-Verse, who is portrayed by Tom Hardy. Now, whether you like the Venom movie or not, you can't deny that Venom and Eddie Brock were the best parts of the entire film. Because not only were the dynamic between the symbiote and Eddie was enjoyable, but they also did do Eddie's origin a fair bit of justice. At least as far as they could get away with without introducing Spider-Man. Now at first glance, you would assume that Venom is only cool because of his edgy persona, as well as how extreme his methods are in terms of killing. But over the years, both Eddie Brock and Venom have evolved beyond just being an anti-Spider-Man, because the more they explore Eddie Brock's origin, the more you realise just how depressing his upbringing really was. And even though Venom, for the most part at least, has been considered more of an anti-hero in recent years, you can't deny that his career as a villain has a huge part in Spider-Man's mythos. And in my eyes, Venom has a lot more going on than what many people give him credit for, because to me, Venom is just a fascinating villain. So because of his iconic appearance, as well as his very depressing origin story, and above all else how he has evolved over the years, this is why I personally believe that Venom is one of the best villains of all time. So are you a huge fan of Venom, and what are some of your personal favourite storylines featuring Eddie Brock and the symbiote? Comment below and share some thoughts. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video, please like and subscribe, take care and have a good one.